Welcome to Season 4 of the Get Out of Teaching podcast presented by Larksong Enterprises. This podcast is for teachers who are considering leaving education but feel like they have no options. I'm your host, Elizabeth Diakos. I'm a career transition coach who guides overwhelmed teachers through a 5-step process out of education and into a life they love. I'd like to see a world where the work of teachers is valued and respected, and that teachers have a career pathway that enables them to continue to offer value to society beyond their work in the classroom. So in this season, we'll be speaking to other experts who help people to change careers, as well as a few ex-teachers who've forged a pathway into something new. So come along for the ride as we get out of teaching. Episode 13. Hi everyone and welcome to the show. And on today's show, I'm very pleased to be interviewing Claire Seeber, who is the founder of Eating Your Cake Too and is a professional career and leadership coach and a change driver. Thanks so much for coming on the show today, Claire.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
So, Claire, you're all the way over in Perth and not in lockdown. So we were just talking about that before we started recording. But there's no gloating. You're being very gracious about us all being stuck here in lockdown in Melbourne when we're recording this, which is what I didn't know what the day is. It's like the end of July. So, okay. So, Claire, tell us, first of all, how did you get started in this space of working as a career and leadership coach?
So my background is HR and communications. So I was working sort of in the corporate space for 15 years or so. And I was living in Melbourne for the last 7 years. My husband only recently moved back to WA via a very long stint trying to travel abroad in 2020, which is a story in its own right.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I definitely know a thing or two about lockdown. I can promise you that. And so in that time was really corporate based. I've had exposure to different industries from mining, oil and gas, through the retail, tech, and kind of everything in between. And one thing has always really stood out to me in every role that I've ever had, which is that, the tasks that we do might change, the industries that we work in might change, but people are inherently the same. And people's desire to feel seen, heard, and understood, it doesn't change, depending on what industry you're in or where you live or what state you're from. Those kinds of things at the core are always true. And I decided to embark on a side hustle. In 2018, I was working a pretty senior corporate role as the head of HR for a really large retail business in Melbourne at the time. And I decided I wanted to start doing a little bit of coaching on the side, at that stage specifically targeted at women. And the reason behind that was I had interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people over the years for a variety of different roles. But one thing just continued to be a theme for me when interviewing women. And it was this, not always, but quite often we struggle with how to sell ourselves with confidence and how to be able to tell our stories and our journeys and how our experiences over the years in the different jobs or careers that we've had, how are they transferable and how are they relevant? And so much so I've even had examples before where, you get to that dreaded salary question, and right. There's that awkward silence where somebody thinks about how they want to answer that. And I have had people before that have said what they've wanted and then they've panicked. And 2 seconds later, they've then said, but I'll take whatever you'll give me. And
no.
I just started seeing that happen time after time after time, and it just ignited something in me that wanted to do something about it. And so that's really where I started a side hustle. Eating Your Cake Too for me comes from a place of, I really believe that as women in particular, life shouldn't have to be a trade-off. I remember, really clearly when I was doing FIFO and working in the mining industry, being asked questions like, oh, how could you possibly have a career and have a child, or how could you possibly think about buying a house and also have a holiday? And it was almost like everything had to be one or the other. You couldn't possibly dream of having both. And that is something I'm really passionate about. I'm not saying it's easy, and I certainly do not profess to be one of those people that think you can sit by the pool with a cocktail and work 1 hour a week and get everything that you want. That's not what Eating Your Cake Too is about. What it is about is working out what is important to you. What are you passionate about? What do you care about? Then let's focus on that, and let's put a game plan in place to get you that. And then that really extends, for me, it extends further also into business, into leadership. It doesn't have to be only purpose or profit. It can be both. It doesn't have to only be people or productivity. It can be both. We don't always have to choose. And for me, that's really the methodology of eating your cake too, is this ability to be able to balance both things.
Yeah.
And that's really been where my work's taken me over the last few years. I've launched, full time now. I've been doing that for a bit over 12 months, and that's seen me have some amazing opportunities all over the world, coaching leaders, coaching people transitioning from one career path to the other. And it's what gets me up in the morning, which I love.
And I love that. I love the idea of having your cake. I mean, what is the point of having cake if you can't eat it?
Exactly. I don't know about you, but I do not bake to then not eat.
No, that's right. I made some Anzac biscuits yesterday using Maggie Beer's recipe. She's an amazing chef, and just couldn't then resist my own cooking. I'm like, this is why I don't bake too often.
Well, you've got to, right? You've got to do quality control on your own product. You really have to.
You can't be putting it out into the world if it doesn't taste good. But I did enough experimenting because we had to substitute some ingredients because I was too lazy to go out to buy golden syrup, but we had treacle. But I don't think it's an adequate substitute in hindsight. But never mind. It tastes very similar when it's just like out of the jar, but in the actual biscuit, I felt like it was missing something. So anyway, never mind. It was worth the experiment. Now we've got a lot of Anzac biscuits. Okay, so tell me, imagine that we have a lady named Donna who's 52. She's been teaching since she was, say, 22, so about 30 years, 25, 30 years. She might have stopped to have a couple of children along the way, or 3. And she's kind of woken up one morning and said to herself, I don't think I can do this anymore. I've given teaching everything I've got. It's been great, but the passion's gone for me and I don't want to keep doing it. And I'm 52. I've probably got another 15 years of working life left in me at least. And realistically, like my neighbour just finished working just before COVID. She was 72. So Donna might have another 20 years of working life left, and maybe even more by the time she's at the point, we're at the pointy end of that in her early 70s. So if she's able to, she could have another whole career before she retires. What would you say to someone like Donna, who I will guarantee is not going to negotiate a good salary arrangement or anything like that because she just hasn't got experience outside of that one sector, working in education? Where would we go with her?
Oh, there's so many things I would say to Donna. I would love to meet Donna. The first place I would start is if you now know what you don't want, great place to start. But the next thing we need to do then is work out what does good look like. If we know we're no longer passionate about teaching and we've given that everything we've got, great. But now we need to step back and think about, well, if I don't want X, what is Y? And I would also suggest to Donna that there probably are a few things she does enjoy about her teaching role. So let's peel the layers back on that and understand the elements of the work that she was doing that do still light her up, because maybe it's just doing the same thing in the same place over and over again is where the passion has died. Not if we were able to take those skills though and put them in a new environment and put them with a new group of people doing something different, we might all of a sudden find that we actually do still enjoy those things. So my first piece of advice to Donna would be to step back and almost work out because teaching is such, and I'm not a teacher, so I don't pretend to be an expert in this place at all. But to me, teaching is a huge bucket. There is a whole raft of skills and tasks and jobs that would sit under this bucket of teaching. So that in itself probably presents an opportunity for Donna to step back and actually write down, in my average week, what are all of the things that I actually do, and what are all of the things that I do get involved with. And that's probably things like creating session plans and then there's actually the facilitation of a session, the coordination, organising students, engaging them, having to sit down and research certain topics. I would imagine marking assignments, communicating, succinctly in order to make sure that my students know what they need to do, and catering to different learning styles. So all of a sudden, you're not just teaching, you're doing a whole raft of other things as well. So first thing I would say to Donna is step back and work out exactly what do you do in your average week? What things do you get involved with?
So
and then secondly,
you're suggesting, Claire, that she kind of almost makes up a job description of what this is what I actually do. Like a huge list of all the things. That would be a massive list. You're right.
It would be a massive list. But sometimes I do see with clients, sometimes when we're so deep in the wormhole of our own lives, right, which we all are, it can sometimes be really hard to step back and work out what those tasks are that we actually do, or we don't consider something a task. And then we might say that to somebody else and they go, hang on, so what you're saying is really you do X, Y, and Z. And you're like, oh, I've never thought about it like that. So the other suggestion I'd give Donna is, if she's struggling with that, is to find a friend or a peer, somebody that she trusts, and get them almost to just ask her those questions. What does your average day look like? What do you get involved in? And they can then play back to her what they're hearing. That's one really good way, one really easy way for Donna to flesh some of this stuff out.
Yeah. Okay. So they would ask questions like, what do you do before you start the day, like the official school day? What are the activities that you do? And I know for me it was maybe photocopying or laminating something, or having a conversation with the business manager about an order that I'd placed, or there'd be 100 different things, or call a parent perhaps, or, those kinds of things. And then, set up your room, and maybe I used to somehow always, because I taught art, I'd always end up with kids' clothes. I don't know what they were doing in the art room. They always seem to leave stuff. And so I'd also have to do this kind of, investigation of this item of clothing I know belongs to the younger sibling of another child I've taught because it's got the surname on it, but judging by the size, this child must be only in grade 1 or something. And so then getting out the school roll and trying to find them, and then get another child to run it down to their classroom. Like it's sort of, detective
work.
Yeah, detective work. Now, so there was always something like that. That wasn't, that's not on any job description anywhere, I'll guarantee it. And yet that was actually Friday afternoon. That was how I spent my lunchtime, was returning all the lost property.
Yeah.
Oh, it was funny. But, it was kind of exciting too. Like I love the thrill of the chase, trying to track down all these kids. I don't know what brought that to mind, but anyway. Okay. So Donna's now got her list of all of the things that she does in a week, and it's massive. And there's project management stuff there. There's gathering resources. There's liaising with other teachers, with parents, maybe some student leadership work. There's a whole, like you said, a whole raft of skills and activities that she does. Now what? Because I talk to so many teachers and they go, I've got a blank. Like I don't even know what that road ahead might look like.
Yeah. Well, the next thing I would say to Donna is work out from that list, go through and highlight what are the things on this list that I actually do enjoy doing. Like if I could imagine myself doing this, not in the teaching environment, could I enjoy this task? So, if it was things like organising events or coordinating activities, could I actually enjoy that if it was perhaps on a lesser scale and I wasn't doing it in the teaching environment anymore? If Donna's curious about that, highlight it. Go down that list and work out some of the things that you think you could still enjoy. And then secondly, go through that list and look at all of the things that if you could have your way, you would never do them again. And
right. Yep.
Okay. That would be the next thing that I would say, because what you're trying to do here is work out, if I know that I'm not passionate about this anymore, let's try and pinpoint why. Because I would not suggest that it's everything that you dislike. It's probably a few things that just over time have meant you've just run out of steam. So let's work out what they are.
Yes, when I first started teaching art, we'd have to place an order for so we'd have to plan our curriculum out for at least 6 weeks out so that you had time to get the order in and put it away and all the rest. But writing up the order was just excruciating because it was all done manually. So we'd have to put the codes in and the quantities and then calculate the total and write it all in and then send it away and hope you were right, hope you'd added it up properly or, because otherwise you're going to run out of money in your budget. But, of course, now it's all electronic and it automatically adds up the columns. So I think the job's actually, that part of it's gotten a little bit easier, but I hated it so much and it would suck hours out of my afternoons after school. So, yeah, all right. So finding out the stuff that you really don't want to do again I think is so valuable. And a lot of the teachers I talk to, they actually still really value the kind of doing good in the world aspect of teaching. They value the importance of learning. They value the relationships, and nearly everyone I talk to would still rather be in front of people, even if it's I often use the example of if you were going to work in a hotel, would you be on the front desk or would you be out the back, crunching the numbers or something? And they nearly always say front desk. So they're people, by and large, teachers, I think. So we get that knowledge, but then it's still really hard to know where to go with that. So you've identified this skill set or these tasks that you're really good at and you've worked out what you'd never want to do again. And so we've got a narrower, bucket, if you like. It's a smaller bucket. But then how do we know what roles we can take those skills into?
Yeah. I mean, look, there's really obvious stuff, I guess I could say here, like go and seek out, a career counsellor or a coach and that can help you. But that's potentially not an option for everybody. So I would prefer to also give tips that people can kind of do solo as well. So I think, again, this is probably where I then move into this space of what does good look like for you as well. We've worked out, based on your experience so far and the things that you've done before, what you've enjoyed and the tasks that you perhaps haven't enjoyed. But now the next piece of the puzzle for me is around sitting down and actually thinking about, if I could think of my ideal week, what are the kinds of things that I would be doing? And if I'm saying that I want to step out of teaching now and I want to do something different, what are the other parameters that sit around that? Am I now, is Donna thinking that she to go?
Sorry, Claire, I'm just going to stop you there.
Now, is she thinking that
Claire,
she wants to do?
You're actually breaking up a little bit. I don't know if
you only want to do certain. Sure, all good.
Okay, so we've got Donna, and she's realised the things that she really doesn't want to do, and now she's focusing on what she does want to do, but she can't really picture what that might be or what that might look like. Where do we go next?
Yeah, I mean, there's two parts to this. I could say the really obvious things like go and speak to career counsellors or go and get a coach, etc. But I also fully recognise that is not an option for everybody. So I'd like to be able to give the listeners some, practical things that they can do themselves as well. And my advice to Donna as a next step would be, you've sat down now and you've worked out, based on the experience that you have got, what tasks have you done? And of those tasks, what do you like? What do you maybe not like? But the next part of this puzzle that I think is really important to do up front is for Donna to think about, what if I'm moving out of teaching and I'm moving potentially into a totally new career path and a new landscape, new chapter in my life, what else is important to me in terms of what other parameters are there that I might want to set? And what I mean by that is, does Donna also know that she only wants to work part-time? Does Donna know that she's actually quite open to working weekends? as if that means she gets a few days off during the week, or does Donna know, no way, I don't want to do weekends, I want to spend that with my family. These are all, is Donna open to doing shift work? These are also things that are really important to get clear on up front, because they will also then have an impact on the kinds of roles and jobs that are potentially available to you as well. And so better to know this now than start looking and then find that you're butting up against a wall because you only want 3 days a week, yet you're looking at all of these roles that are only showing full time and you get frustrated by that. So that would be the next piece of advice I'd give for Donna.
Yeah, great advice. And a lot of the teachers that I work with will often go out part-time or do some relief teaching while they're working out their next step, which may not always be appealing to someone, but it's another option that, unless you think about it, you wouldn't even necessarily, consider that. So I love the idea of Donna working part-time, if that was me, and maybe I also really love the idea of like being able to, that flexibility. So one of the great things about not teaching is you don't have to take school holidays anymore. So you can go on holidays when everybody else is at school, and then maybe you're available to cover a shift or something if you're doing some kind of shift work for someone who does need to take the school holidays. So that's if you've got older kids. I'm assuming Donna's kids are, almost adult now. If she, when she stopped to have them in the middle of her career, but now they're in their late teens or the young adults, and so she doesn't need to be tied to the school holidays anymore. Okay, so she's realised that she wants to be part-time. She's flexible about what day of the week she works, and she doesn't mind working in the school holidays, and especially because that means cheaper travel in the rest of the year as well, because you're not competing with peak times. And let's assume also that you can actually travel. So that
would be helpful.
Yeah. Okay, so then what? So how does she then decide where to go? Like the options seem almost limitless, and yet that's often the hard part. It's overwhelming. Like where do I go next?
Yeah. The next thing I would suggest to Donna, if she's sort of rolling in this space all on her own, is now just go and treat yourself on Seek, on LinkedIn, and actually go in and look for, so for example, let's say Donna's based in Melbourne. She knows she only wants part-time. Especially if Donna hasn't been on anything like Seek for a really long time or LinkedIn for a really long time, go on now and actually just put in the parameters that you know thus far. So things like project management, like admin, events, perhaps there's probably some level of like coordination in there, so those kinds of roles, I would just go in to Seek, put in tick part-time in Melbourne, and then tick all of the boxes that look like something that was on your task list, and just start looking at what comes up.
Okay.
This is still a big field for Donna, but now what she's giving herself the opportunity to do is she's just giving herself permission to have a look at what are the kinds of things that come up in this space. What are the kinds of, when I'm looking at these ads and I'm looking at the dot points that they're listing of what's required of people, am I seeing connections between what's on those ads and what was on my list of things that I've done before? And even more so, am I then starting to see trends in the kinds of jobs that there are links between my list and what they're advertising? Because I would be willing to almost bet Donna money that there will be themes between her list and the kinds of roles or job ads that she reads, and she goes, oh, I could do that. I could do that. I could do that. So that would be the next practical thing that I would suggest that Donna go and do.
Yeah, and that's pretty easy, really, isn't it? That's an afternoon's work, just to start having a look, see what's out there. And then, okay, so say she finds a sector or an area that she's interested in. I'm going to make something up. So say she decides she'd love to work in retail because she's actually quite interested in still having that interface with the public, but she really wants to have it a job where the stakes aren't as high as they are in education. Like in education, you're dealing with families and their children, and it's very important to them, and it's their, it's their genetic passing on the next generation, and there's a lot of anxiety around how children are cared for in the education sector. So she wants to step out of that and just have a little break from that. Even if this ends up not being her forever career, she just wants to do something still with people, but maybe, she can leave it at the door when she walks out at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So what's next? How does she translate from education into the retail sector?
This is such a great question, and I did not know if you knew this or not, but I think I touched on it earlier, like my previous role was head of HR for a big retail company in Melbourne. And one of the brands that I actually used to look after was Shoes and Socks.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah. And the reason I bring this up is because I used to see resumes come through from ex-teachers, and I loved them because what it would say to me is, firstly, like these people have experience already dealing with children of a variety of different ages. They're really very patient. So I can already tick that box up front. They're used to dealing with parents or have a level of comfort dealing with parents, and therefore they can deal with customers. So already you're starting to see, and this is just, one example of a store you may consider in the retail space. But even if Donna knew, what, I actually want to just have some space from dealing with anything in the children's space right now, and I maybe want to move into something that's like purely dealing in adult retail. Right. Well, adult retail sounds a bit questionable, but in adult stores also sounds questionable. You know where I'm going.
Like menswear or something.
Menswear, or like female. Like let's say she wants to go and work at Portman's or Suzanne or something like that. There are. I would suggest to Donna, go back and think about the skills that you do have. You are essentially customer facing every day. Your customer just happens to be students in a classroom.
Yeah.
If in this scenario, your customer just happens to be you or I who walk into a store and might want to buy a jacket or a pair of pants. How we treat them, how we engage with them, how we articulate, how we ask them questions to understand how are they interpreting things? Are they understanding what I'm saying? Asking them questions to unpack what it is that they're looking for. These skills are still the same, whether you're in the classroom or you're in a store.
Yeah, I love it. That's actually such a lovely insight. And even when you were talking about Shoes and Socks, so for our international listeners who aren't familiar with that brand, they sell kids' shoes and I guess socks as well, but a lot of it would be fitting and like making sure that they get the right color and the right size and the right shape for their foot and all that kind of stuff. So there would be lots of chatting with the child, chatting with the parent, and then a bit of, ringing up the purchase at the end and maybe saying, oh, while you're here, do you want some leather cleaner or something? Go with it. I don't know. I'm making stuff up now, but I'd be great at that, right?
Yeah.
Go and sell shoes and socks now. But I just love the idea of the way you've shown the translation of those skills, because I think what often happens is that a resume will go out and maybe you're a rare breed that can see the value, but I think a lot of people go, oh, you don't have retail experience? Sorry. Go away. And that's what I'm in international Facebook groups with teachers, and this is what they're encountering. Or they're saying, the ones in the US who've got 2 jobs because the pay's so bad, they're saying, oh, actually, I could fall back on my retail career. I've got experience in that. And they don't see the value of the teaching experience in that sector. Even they themselves who do both don't see the crossover. So, okay, she's decided to work in retail. She wants to get a job at, say, Portman's, which is like women's wear, pretty nice suits and stuff. I haven't been into Portman's for a long time, but that's the kind of vibe. How does she take I can manage a classroom of 25 little people and turn that into I can run your store or I can serve your customers? what does she have to do on the resume? Because she's applying for a job, so she's going to have a resume, presumably.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. This is where, in my opinion, the power of storytelling comes into play. So I would suggest the thing that and I say this to clients all the time, you have one objective with your resume, one objective, and that is to get cut through and have somebody pick up the phone and say, I'd love to meet you for a further conversation. That's it. That's your sole objective. And so when we've got hundreds of people potentially applying for the same role, we need to find a way to cut through. We need to find a way to intrigue somebody enough to go, I need to meet that person. I want to meet that person. They seem like they've got something different to this pile of, 200 other people that are just telling me that they've got a great work ethic and are organised. Like, fantastic, but that's what everybody's saying. So what can you say that intrigues just enough to guarantee that they're calling you saying, I'd love to have a further chat? And this is where I see I see such a great opportunity for people with a teaching background to tell a story similar to how I've just expressed it, around how, their store experience or working in a retail store is just a different environment to the classroom. And how really that if they can go from, teaching year, 25, 30 year 3 students 5 days a week, that they're patient and energetic and highly engaging, and how can they transfer those skills into a retail store? And if I was looking at a resume as a recruiter and somebody had that, an impact statement at the very top, couple of sentences, and they hit me right between the eyes with some sort of humor around, how the likeness of a classroom to a retail store, and really we're just hurting. We're kind of hurting people to help them get to where we need them to go, right? Like, how can we storytell an experience from our teaching career and put that on our resume in a couple of sentences and liken it to a retail store? And there's so many ways that somebody could do that. That it might, again, this is probably where, when you're in, I call it the wormhole of your own life, right? It is hard to see like the wood for the trees when it's you. So this can be sometimes where the power of having somebody else that in your life help you with that, and again, this is just where having conversation like you and I are having and get them to record it and then listen back to the kinds of things that come out when Donna's talking about her job, the funny stories she might have from her teaching days. Record that with a friend, then listen back to it and take some gold nuggets from that and see how you could put those into your resume. And I would, again, guarantee that there will be gold in there that could be transcribed because you're relaxed and you're having a conversation with a friend. And when we're far more relaxed, things come up far more naturally than when we're just sitting in front of our computer screen staring at a blank page going, how do I write an impact statement?
Yeah. And, going back to the shoes and socks thing, I keep thinking I've heard so many stories about weird things that kids have done with their shoes, or, eaten the teacher's shoes.
Oh, God.
Like, I'm sure every teacher has a shoe story that they could tell. Yeah, awesome. I love that. Okay, so we've now got to the point where we've got the cut through, as you call it, and we've been invited to come to an interview. Donna's been teaching for 30 years. What happens next? It's a bit scary. I'm scared on her behalf.
Yeah, that's fair. That's totally fair. Interviews can be scary. The first thing I would say is, look, this is for Donna just as much as it is for the store. So Donna, I would really encourage Donna to go back to her own parameters as well, where we started, around what does success look like for Donna and what are the things that are important for Donna for this next role, and go into the interview also holding on to those things, instead of what I so often see people do when especially when they have an interview for a while, is just think I'm at the mercy of the company that I'm interviewing for. Right. This is a two-way street, right? Like, this needs to be right for you just as much as it needs to be right for the company. And some of my most memorable interviews or, favorite interview experiences have been where the candidate has also come prepared with questions that are important to them, because that says to me that they're not just scattergunning and applying for hundreds of jobs and taking whatever will come their way. They've actually taken a measured approach to what they want to do next. And they've really thought about the kind of company that they want to be in. And, oh, lucky me, it happens to be mine. And that appeals to me far more than the scattergun approach, where there's really no thought or heart put into any job that we're going for. We're just going to take whatever we can. So that would be the first thing I would say.
So what are the kinds of questions that you would ask in an interview?
I always like to ask the interviewers, how would you describe the culture here? How would you describe the working environment? How, what is it that you like the most about this company? What is my favorite question to ask at the very end is, based on what you now know about me and my experience, are there any red flags or concerns that you have? And then you pause and just wait. And the reason that I like this question is because you're giving yourself the opportunity to then answer any red flags or reservations that the recruiter or the hiring manager might be holding then and there, instead of what would have otherwise happened is you'll leave the interview, they'll have a conversation about you and how they feel that went. And they might then raise, oh, but what do you think about, do you think that this could be a concern, or is this maybe a red flag? And then they'll make an assumption on what the answer to that question is. And then you've lost the ability to answer it for them. So I always love to ask that question, because it gives you the opportunity to have one last go at alleviating any concerns or questions that they might be holding that could just have a really easy answer to them. And then everybody goes, oh, that's not a problem after all.
Yeah, I love that. While you've been talking, I've gone back in time to it was actually a teaching job that I was applying for, and it was a new school, and I really my heart's desire at the time was to set up a ukulele program after school. That's what I really wanted to do, or set up a program in school, anything to do with ukuleles. I just love the instrument. And so I had this conversation, and they told me that the budget for the performing arts for that year was $600, which would have entirely used up the if I was going to buy a class set of ukuleles, that would have been it. The $600 would have been, I would have needed to have used all of it to buy a class set. And so I didn't say anything. I just said, oh, okay. And I kind of, I blew the interview. I'd been teaching all day as well, and I'd had the grade from hell that morning. So I actually, I just, I wasn't in a good place anyway to be in an interview. But then added to that was this, what I saw as a limitation. If I just said to them, look, I know you've told me these limitations. Can I just tell you what my vision is? And if I just said that to them, imagine the difference that would have, even if I didn't get the job, I would have gone away feeling like I'd done everything I could to show them what I could bring. So I think that's what I'm taking away from what you're saying now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many ways you can use that kind of questioning technique to almost just, again, it gives you the final opportunity to make sure that you were able to say everything you could and leave in a position of power. And what I mean by that is really leave it in a space where, you've almost then positioned the conversation or the interview back to you. And that's really what I would, if you take anything from this podcast conversation, take that question and use it. Yeah. Do you want to just repeat it again? We might wrap it up there. I think that's a really great way to end. Can you just the question? Sure. So when you get to the end of an interview and you will hopefully get asked by the recruiter, do you have any questions for us? You might ask one or two other questions that we discussed, but then the last question I would ask is, I would say, based on what you now know about me and my experience, are there any red flags or concerns that you have? And then pause. Don't panic. If you feel like you're going to panic, squeeze a pen, a pencil, sit on your hand, take a drink of water, anything, but just pause and then wait and see what you get in return.
Nice. I love it. And I can just picture that environment and that conversation and the recruiters or the people looking at each other going, oh, do we have any concerns? And then, you know, whatever comes from that and the opportunity then to take on those questions if they have any. I love it. That's really a great insight. Thank you, Claire, for that. Okay, so we're gonna have one final question before we wrap this up for today. Claire, what's your favourite song?
I have so many, but the song that I'm just going to go with the one that immediately pops into my head, which is Tina Turner. You're simply the best. And for some reason, that for me is a real get up and go song. So I'm going to go with that one.
Right. So nice, energizing, empowering kind of song.
Yeah, absolutely. Good song to play before you're about to do something that makes you a bit nervous or uncomfortable.
Nice. So if you walk into your interview bopping along to Simply the Best inside your head, you're going to bring that lovely energy into the space. That'll make you seem more confident, make you seem more alive and vibrant, and that could be the very thing that gets you over the line. Nice.
Exactly.
Oh, Claire Seeber, thank you so much for coming on the Get Out of Teaching podcast today. It's been great to meet you and to hear your insights and your wisdom. Thank you.
No worries at all. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the Get Out of Teaching podcast presented by Larksong Enterprises with your host, Elizabeth Diakos. Do you know someone else who could benefit from hearing more stories of hope and transition from teachers all around the world? Please take a moment to share this and other episodes via your podcast app. Each share helps me reach listeners just like you who can benefit from this content. The Get Out of Teaching podcast is proud to be part of the Experts on Air podcast network. For show notes and other resources, please visit larksong.com.au/podcast.